Dear viewers of the Tom Photo channel, today we're talking about video again, specifically about making short fiction films on a very low budget. Some people talk about no budget films too, but you still need a camera, a car to drive to the location, etc. It's still going to cost you a little bit. I recently made a short film on a minimal budget and I'd like to share the experience with you. The link to this film is below, and I'd like to encourage you to watch it to better understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking briefly, but I'll elaborate on these topics in my future videos. It's exciting to make your first fiction film. Your brain is constantly pounded with images from Hollywood films, and you really want to look like the big guys. It's good because it'll push you to try harder, but it's hard because it's difficult to achieve and it may decrease your creativity. Maybe at first think indie. Indie films are more about message and less about special effects and expensive stuff. Try to come up with one simple idea and work towards it in the film. I'd not go with too many levels and complicated structure at first. These are very hard to pull off. Think what should be the 2-sentence summary of what your film is trying to say. For example, in my case, there are bigger values than material values, but you have to be able to see that. Then think what would be a nice and linear way of getting there, but with a small twist. Don't be afraid to look simplistic. Often the short film is more about viewing pleasure than about learning something you didn't already know. What should be the resolution of your film? It's natural to want to go with the highest possible, such as 4K. I, on the other hand, went with HD for many good reasons. Obviously, the HD is much easier and quicker to work with, and the files are smaller. It's also more forgiving, not showing all small mistakes with focusing so visibly. But most importantly, the HD went better with the mood of my film, which is not so much about showing smallest details, but maybe even hiding them for better impact. I filmed in 4K before, and I can tell you that it can become a mess if you have less than amazing computer to work with. But sometimes you may want to shoot a part of your film in 4K though, even if the final product is going to be HD, because 4K allows you to crop the footage and digitally stabilize it, and you'll still have enough headroom to get some HD out of it. However, my advice for your first film would be to go with HD and forget about 4K entirely. Try to resist the urge to use 4K and you'll soon see why. Location needs to be nearby because you have to visit the location more than once. In the extreme case, it could be just your own room. I've seen short horror films shot between someone's bed and desk, and it worked well. In my film, I wanted to show variable landscape, so I needed to travel 10 kilometers in various directions. I want the landscape to play a part in the film. I felt I needed a geographical dimension as well. Finding actors can be difficult. The best solution is your friends and family. You can be your own actor too, but then you're limited to static tripod shots if you don't have a helper. In the first film, I'd go with no more than 1 or 2 actors, and I'd try to avoid dialogue, in fact any words altogether, because this adds hugely to the complexity. The recording system needs to be at another level, and the same is true of lighting solutions. If you let your actor be farther away, you may get away without additional lighting such as lamps, diffusers, reflectors, etc. Before you start, you'll want to write a script that details what's going to happen. You may even want a screenplay with exact camera movements to save you time. However, this is not critical if you work alone and on your first film, and you don't need to make sure that Brad Pitt doesn't spend more time on the set than his valuable time allows. I wrote a script for my film. I also had a rudimentary screenplay, not step by step, but a list of scenes and camera movements I'd like to see in the film. Both the script and screenplay got hugely modified during filming. You don't foresee everything. You may want to film at a river, but the fisherman just won't go home. So your river becomes a nearby lake and midday shot becomes an evening shot. No problem. It's a good idea to record several takes of each scene and try different angles. You'll discover problems in post-production and then you cannot go back. Things like a mosquito landing on the lens or small problems with focus or lighting. You may find that footage doesn't go with the flow because you filmed all movements from left to right and now you cannot introduce variation because you had just one take. So always at least 2 takes. Make sure the time of day and actors' clothes don't change if everything that was filmed over a 2-week period should take place within 10 minutes in the film. These things are easy to miss. In my case, I accidentally filmed some takes without the backpack that the actor always needed to carry. Oh well, back to the beginning. It may help to practice each set beforehand, but do film even the practice sets. You may find that the practice take or small parts of it are better than the carefully staged one because it's more natural. Don't forget to record some B-roll too. This is a random footage shot at the same location that you may want to use as filler or for transitions in the film. It may help to make your film smoother and it'll give you more editing options. Should you record sound with your video is not an easy question. If you don't have speaking in the scene, it may be easier to record sound separately. This is even more true if you don't have the equipment and helpers to hold the microphones over the heads and everywhere the actor stepped. Without sound, you can also talk to the actor while filming. For example, please walk just a bit slower, now turn your head a bit more, etc. The actors are also less stressed if they don't have to think about everything at once, and you behind the camera behave like you're in it together with the actor. This only works if the actor doesn't say something directly to the camera. This is why the dialogues are tricky. You cannot go back and lip sync. My initial plan was to go back to the location and record the sounds such as bicycle riding and water splashing later and then put them in. Quite early on I discovered that the site-specific sounds don't add to my particular film, but they actually make the viewer pay attention to the unnecessary details. So in this film, I went just with music. The sound makes the film alive, and it matters even more than perfect camera work. Yes, I said that. Music should reflect the mood of the film and enhance the visual part. Just make sure you don't run into copyright issues and you have the right to use the music. Using royalty-free music is the best option. If you can make your own music, or at least music sounds on the keyboards, that'd be perfect. Camera movements matter much. Luckily, there's one movement, or a lack of a movement, the tripod shot, that almost always works, and it's a great option if you don't have other ideas. Gimbal is useful when your camera needs to move smoothly. Then there are camera sliders for smooth movement, but this is pro stuff. The general rule is that if you want to show something through the eyes of a bystander person, then the camera should not be static, but if a person is alone at home watching TV, then the tripod is very much okay. When a person is riding a bicycle and you're looking through her eyes, then you should shake the camera a bit more. I like to hold the camera steady when the scene is busy and something moves around, and move the camera when the scene is steady. However, every combination is fine to test. Use your imagination. People are often after the so-called cinematic footage. Again, they want to recreate what they've seen in Hollywood movies, especially in slightly older ones. And I agree this does look professional. But what is a cinematic look? I'll produce a special video on that one day because it's more complicated. It's more than just the frame rate of 24 frames per second seen in most Hollywood movies. The cinema feel comes from a combination of pro camera moves, careful lighting, washed out color, slow frame rate, large lens aperture, powerful soundtrack, often use of fog and smoke, and a list of other things. It's a synergy of things rather than one feature you could directly pinpoint. I went with 25 frames per second, and then slowed my footage down to 24 frames per second in post-production to add a tiny bit of timeless feel. You can film at faster frame rates and then get even more slow motion in those more epic moments. Slowing down your video can do wonders sometimes. I went with larger apertures to get better bokeh. Blurry backgrounds let your actor pop out and the result is more mystical. The f-stop of 2.8 is the so-called cinematic f-stop, often used in movies. However, depth of field is what we're trying to modulate here, and this is also a function of how close your subject is relative to the background and also to the focal length of the lens. So I find I need to play with the aperture and not keep it at 2.8 all the time. If the subject is further away from me and I want a better bokeh, I need to increase the aperture. Things are a bit simpler with shutter speed. We can spend time talking about it much more, but my best advice is to keep it at twice the frame rate. This will give you just the right amount of motion blur. For example, if you film at 25 frames per second, keep your shutter speed at 50. I didn't film under artificial light, but if you do, you need to consider flickering issues. You'll want your shutter speed or frame rate to be the same as the frequency of the electrical system in your country. Or it should be that value divided or multiplied by an integer. This is how you can get rid of the flicker. Electrical system in the EU is 50 Hz, but in North America it is 60 Hz. Since I'm in the EU, 25 frames per second and shutter speed of 50 are ideal for me. We talked about aperture and shutter speed. This means that ISO should be next. I would fix my ISO at a value that produces the cleanest picture. Note that this is not necessarily the lowest value. For my Fuji X-T30, I like 640. If your aperture, ISO and shutter speed are fixed, how do you then control your exposure? I do it with variable ND filter, and I'll put a link down below once I produced a special video on ND filters. I turn the filter in front of the lens until the exposure is right. I use Zebra either at 95% or 100% to decide when the exposure is right. The problem is that the variable ND filter will change its properties when you turn into or away from the light source. What you need to avoid more than anything is jumps in exposure. Okay, time to show you my minimalistic gear that I use. I have several cameras and lenses that are suitable, but for this film I used Fujifilm X-T30 and just one camera. I intended to use several cameras and include some special effects too. However, about halfway into filming, I became obsessed with the idea of getting it done with just one camera, so that I could say it to you in this video and encourage more people to make films with simple equipment. My lens was Fujinon 35mm f1.4 prime lens, and I didn't use any other lenses. I have 3 good reasons for that. First, maximal f-stop of 1.4 is really nice. Second, normal field of view. Thirdly, it's slightly retro output. And finally, superb image quality. As a downside, this lens has no image stabilization. I filmed from a Wellbond Videomate 638 fluid head tripod. It's a budget tripod, but among the best bangs for the buck. I used Zhiyun Weebill S gimbal, which is out of the world good. My natural density filter is a budget one again from JCC. I have made special videos reviewing the equipment that I mention here. Please see the description box for these videos. I do my post-processing on a Linux machine running Kdenlive. Live. I might sometime do semi-automatic frame level editing. For that I use GIMP or Raw Therapy, and I've talked about those in my other videos too. The links are below. In my film, I didn't use Fujifilm's film simulations straight out of the box, but I wanted to color grade myself. In this situation, most Fuji users would use Fuji's F-Log to get a very flat footage first. I went with an intermediate option and used Eterna with highlights and shadows both at -1. I downloaded a large collection of free LUTs or lookup tables from the internet and chose my favorite one for the look that I wanted, and then I applied the LUT to my footage. I'll show you how in my future videos. I then additionally tweaked the color balance. My goal was to get a more cinematic, washed out look, but still retain the essential colors. I mostly added blue tint to the shadows. Making films is fun. Let me know in the comments what films you've made or would like to make. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you consider subscribing to my channel, that'll make me very happy. See you in my future videos about photography and videography. Happy filming. Bye.